think he talked about, mythos. Mythos is actually, in Greek, contradiction to logos, the rational thought. Mythos is truth through not that kind of linear rationality. And the power of myth is like the power of dream, that you can have contradictory meanings in it. Otherwise, if you talk normally, rationally, you can't contradict yourself because our language is so composed that we have to say this, it follows from that. But myths can have contradictory meanings, just like dreams can. And that is their importance part, that you can have different contradictory meanings, and that contradictions are not to be said one is bad or good, and you can take this one or that one. So that is the importance of contradiction, and myths allow that. History does not allow. History allows different interpretations also, but myths allow different meanings in the same myth. Shiva, for instance. Now you've said Shiva is muscular. I mean, he has a very important function. He's the mythologist of our middle classes in Indian times. So what he does, I think, is very important. So I think I'd ask him to reflect on what his myth is. But Shiva, for instance, if you look, he's much less masculine than Vishnu or Brahma. He suffers more when the woman goes away. He is not as dominant in myths. So Shiva has also these two. So he's not only the creative phallus and the masculine, he's one who pines, who cries, who worships. So Shiva has also the tender side as well as the muscular side. And that can come in the myths of Shiva together. And that's the importance of the myths, that it can give both sides, or even more sides than Shiva than I can say it here.
Yeah, and you can have those contradictions. And you're right. I mean, Shiva has the Ardhanarishwar part to him.
That
and
Shiva doesn't appear in your work. Why?
Yeah. As he said rightly, the wonderful freedom that myths have is that it allows contradiction. Like I'll just come to an example on that. Before that, I'll just explain the destruction and creation aspect that you spoke of. Not so much from my story, but from the traditional mythology perspective. Because one of the philosophical approaches that we have, once again I'm repeating, not just in Hinduism, but in the ways of the ancient people across the world, was that creation was actually the other side of destruction. Because, like I said, they saw time in a circular manner, right? Because something can get created only when something else is destroyed, all right? So then actually, there is no real destruction. There is only a change of form, right? When you die as an individual, I hope it happens after many, many decades and years, but when you die as an individual, your body will not escape the universe. It will just change form into something else. Your soul, the energy or the part of God within you will also either find release or come back once again in another form, and your genes will carry on through your progeny. So from your personal perspective, it may appear like destruction. Actually, it's not. You're just changing your form. Therefore, then anyone who is the god of destruction, in a way, is also the creator. Because what he's destroying one aspect, but he's creating another aspect. Therefore, it is almost natural that if Shiva is the god of destruction, he'll also have a phallic symbol, because he's also the god of, in a sense, through destruction, he's creating something else. That's the philosophical logic. And that was a powerful concept, because that used to teach, I think, most people not to be afraid of death. It's not the end. That's from a philosophical perspective. I just want to add one more point on that thing of contradictions. And that is where the freedom that comes from myths certainly helps. Like, we might have rules which may make a lot of sense for us, once again, in our reality. Like the rule that we should be non-violent, And of course, it's a great rule, at least in India's case. Thank God we follow that rule, at least largely. We are not as violent a country as we used to be 100 years ago. And because of that, a lot of social change has happened with minimal violence. It's a good rule for us to follow. Is this a standard rule that you should follow for all time? Or is this a rule that all people should follow regardless of the situation they are facing? Probably not. Consider the case of Tibet. For example, Tibetan Buddhism. I love the philosophies of Tibetan Buddhism. It is such a wonderful culture, right? The reality, though, is that in its homeland, it is being destroyed. It's a fact. We may like to kind of be blind about it, but the reality is China is destroying it. It's a matter of time before the Tibetan culture in its homeland, the way we know it, it'll be gone. China is focused and determined. It's nothing like what our government is, right? So Tibetan culture in its homeland is going to go. That's a fact of life. Would it have been better if the Tibetan Buddhists were not practicing such an extreme form of non-violence? This is a complex question. It's a complex question. It doesn't have an easy answer. Because is Tibet losing if their culture dies out? Of course. My submission is the entire world is losing if Tibetan Buddhism as a culture dies out. Now, you see some of the Tibetan Buddhists, the strength of character that they have is amazing. The belief that they have in non-violence. There are, in the last year, around 150 Tibetan Buddhists have, in a form of protest, they have self-immolated. I'd seen this picture in the Time magazine. I got tears in my eyes when I saw that picture because there was this monk who was sitting in a meditative pose. He had put himself on fire and there were flames all over his body and his face was completely calm. He wasn't in pain at all. And I was thinking, my God, what courage! What courage! But their belief in non-violence is leading to the death of their culture. So this is a complex question. How do we answer this question? That is non-violence good or bad? And that's where you need the freedom of contradictions so that you can adapt to different scenarios. And I'm not saying violence is good. I'm just saying these are complex questions without easy answers. Without easy answers necessarily.
Because Sudhir has also written a lot on question of violence. And I'm going to come back to you. We wanted to open this up for questions a bit early. I have two quick questions to ask the panelists and then we'll come back so that you have plenty of time for audience participation. I come back to, and I don't actually, the complex questions you're raising apart, I would differ from you slightly in saying that we're a non-violent society. I think the violence in our society is very deeply hidden.
I was saying relatively.
But you do only see the hidden levels of violence towards women, which are happening in the house and in the home.
I'm just saying relatively. Of course, there's a lot of violence in India, but relative to many of the other societies, like, New York's violent crime rate is 10 times the crime rate in Mumbai, despite having a far, greater police strength, a much more efficient justice system. We have so many systemic problems in India. But even then, for some reason, we Indians, we don't get as violent. Mumbaikars don't get as violent as the New Yorkers do. So there is a difference in the culture. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying there's no violence, but relatively, we are a non-violent society, and I give credit to Mahatma Gandhi for that.
Okay. Can I ask you to reflect on when you talk about the flip side of destruction being creation, the dance of destruction that Kali dances is the same thing. She dances a dance of destruction in order to create a new world. Why does Shiva's dance of destructive aspect and creative aspect have so much more resonance than Kali's? I mean, why is it that...
it depends on which devotee you're asking. If you go to any of the Shaktas, in Hinduism there are three, and there are of course 33 gods and various groups of devotees, but the three broadest streams are the Vaishnavas, the follower of Lord Vishnu and his various avatars, the Shaivites, the followers of Lord Shiva and his family, his sons, etc., and the Shaktas, the follower of Shakti Ma. If you ask, and the Shaktas are as numerous as big. If you ask the Shaktas, it's a dance of Kali Ma which will inspire them. If you ask the Shaivites, it's a dance of Shiva which will inspire them. But if you ask people who have gone deep into Hinduism, they'll actually say, there's no difference. They're the same.
Okay.
To answer your question, I mean, my take on you were asking about Shiva and Kali's part of it. My take on that is that, again, because it has been written by men, women's energy, etc., is looked upon by men as a feeling of fear. It is uncontrolled. It will destroy the world.
Yeah, that's very much there.
Shiva's energy is not a destruction one, it is a controlled one, leading to creation, etc., etc. So women's women's energy is a dangerous kind of thing which Shiva has to.
And is it because it's sexual? Is that
I would say it's sexual, but fear of the women's sexuality, that can be completely uncontrolled. So what does it need? So women, the feeling behind it, women are the powerful ones, and women goddesses are powerful, and male gods have the authority. So they have authority, means a social authority to control it. So authority and power in are separate. Power unconsciously we believe resides with women, but authority with men. So Shiva is the authority one who stops Kali from, or Durga at that time, and after she killed Mahisamardhini, that she goes and destroys all the world. If he doesn't lie down and makes her ashamed that she's on the chest, who knows what would happen.
Okay, can I ask you one last, you want to say something, Amish, to that? To go back to the role mythology plays in the minds of people who come to you in the course of your practice, your patients, they're not all Hindus, so they're not all necessarily informed by Hindu myth. What happens with the non-Hindu people? What is there to...
Non-Hindus, this mythology or Hindu mythology does not play as much a role. But there's one interesting part which comes up, I think he was mentioning the contradictions, that in the Hindu mind we are much more comfortable with contradictions. There's no anxiety about this and that. If you look at all the Hindu laws, yes, you should not kill, except there are always exceptions to a law. I mean, we know from old Hindu Dharma Shastra there is, you should not pee on the street of the king, except if you're an old man, if you are drunk, etc. So every law has its exceptions. In the non-Hindus part, there are no exceptions. I'm talking about the Christian, Muslim. There is thou shalt and thou shalt not kill. So their feeling of guilt, etc., is much stronger than the Hindu patient's feelings of guilt, because we have been used to that there are always exceptions to every rule. So you are not really under that you have committed such a big sin, because maybe, so this maybe ke sab chal sakta hai is a very, very important part of the Hindu mind. And that's why I think the interesting or the attraction of mythology for Hindus is also because of its paradoxes and contradictions, which a mind which is not able to, which feels that there's a cognitive dissonance, there's anxiety, if it is things are not straight off, will not have.
And is there also an open-endedness in mythology, that there's never a closure or a single conclusion?
Because I mean, any Shiva myth, you can have an opposite one. Any Devi myth, you can have an opposite one. Every myth, not an opposite, you can three versions of it. And they are all fine, they are all okay, they all coexist. There's not one myth for anyone, etc. So that's why importance, as I said, of the mythologists of our time, which myths are they bringing up at this particular time?
So just as your Shiva is Shiva and Bholenath and Ardhanarishwar, although you don't see the Bholenath aspect in your...
Well, he's, at least the way I see him, the way he came to me in my books, he has a clean heart and a sharp mind, which is a fantastic combination.
And I can imagine that your books have such big success that this must be a feeling of your readers also. They want that kind of a Shiva too. I would imagine.
Probably. It's the way he came to me.
I would imagine
Probably.
that, yeah.
Do you know anything about the profile of your readers? Are they male or female?
I know. Judging by my events, I think it's a fair mix of both, male and female, largely young.
Let's have lights on in this auditorium, then we can see.
There are too much lights. I can't see clearly at all.
Okay, thank you both. Let's open it up. If you have questions, can we actually have lights so we can see?
I noticed there are a lot of hands, so maybe someone can just take a mic around and
Sorry?
whoever.
Yeah, no.
Excuse me. What's the volunteer? What's your name? Sorry, I can't hear you. Just speak into the mic. Archana. Okay, Archana will decide whoever gets to ask. You need to grab her attention.
This is a question to you regarding the fact.
Can you hold the mic closer to?
Regarding the fact that in India we have never believed that there is any one reality, that there is any one fact, that there is no truth. It is neither this nor that, nor that, nor that. is the truth. That means that what you believe and what you have faith in is the truth. And therefore, facts are what you believe in at that moment. That is the reality that you create. It manifests itself because of your faith. It is a manifestation. This very gathering over here is a manifestation of whatever is the common thought of people who are here. So to discuss mythology is to understand that there is no reality, the reality of death or life. Nobody was born and nobody died, because we are just the manifestation of that consciousness.
You're right.
Okay,
You've summarized the discussion beautifully.
I'm going to suggest that we take 3 questions or 4 questions if they're not too long, get the speakers to answer, then take a next lot. Okay? So, Archana, you are choosing. Okay.
Is there a possibility of 1 or 2 lights not coming straight into the eyes? Because
Can we turn these lights down a bit? Is it possible? So the speakers don't get headaches. Okay, ma'am, go ahead. Yeah, thank you. That's great.
Actually, I have 2 points to make. The first being to you, Mr. Tripathi. You spoke about the Yajnavalkya Smriti.
Firstly, Amish, I'm not so old here. Yeah. Not Mr. Tripathi.
All right, Amish. You spoke about some text, Yajnavalkya Smriti, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, in which you said that an unwed woman, if she has a child, will follow the rights of the father, of the grandfather or the father. Now the fact remains there that she's still taking on the rights of another man. And this poor woman is raising the child on her own. So there is...
No, that's not how it's